Don't touch my remote, you know. So yeah, I mean, those things are there, and they're not really to be used as such. Anybody who reaches a certain level of awareness can do this stuff. It's part of the human toolkit. It's not something that I brought in from outside. This is all wired into every human being. And this is part of the human toolkits that are being suppressed and invalidated in everybody, and people are taught that they don't exist, taught that they're not able to do these things. And a pattern that I've seen that's really interesting is that somebody who's in a spiritual road to become enlightened, or like to spiritual evolution, a road of spiritual evolution, will always, without fail, develop all these things, without fail. But somebody who goes out of their way to develop these things are not necessarily developing the spiritual evolution side. So they're not, like, they don't go together, but somehow the person who goes for a spiritual evolution path will always develop these abilities.
It's a natural byproduct.
It's a natural byproduct of developing in a spiritual way.
Yes.
But someone who just goes out and wants to learn telekinesis and whatever, and move things around, or read people's minds, or go and do remote viewing, and they can actually, anybody can do it. They can go out and learn these things, and there's some fabulous tools and books out there that can teach them to do these things. But they don't necessarily develop their spirit by doing it.
Totally understood.
Yeah.
And your telepathic abilities must be very highly advanced. Presumably you can look into anyone's mind and read anything you want to.
Right, that's a really interesting way to put it, because telepathy is not about going into somebody's mind and seeing what's there, because the person's mind is not what holds the memories and feelings and emotions. So even looking at it that way, you're going to be extremely limited to what you can do in a telepathic way. You may be able to do card reading. If somebody's playing cards, you can look into their cards because they're looking at it at that moment, right? Normally, if somebody's told, "Oh, Inelia can read minds," whatever they're trying to hide comes up, like right in front of them. So that will be broadcast, and I can pick that up. But how telepathy really works is it's the best way that I can describe it.
It's a merge.
Yeah, it's more like a merge of mind, a merge of beings more than mind, because a merge perhaps even into the collective where the other person is, right? And then once there, you don't necessarily pick up sentences. You can pick up visuals, feelings, memories, and sometimes actual thoughts as well, like what the person's thinking at that precise moment.
The way that I understand this from the conversations that we've had about this is it's like you temporarily step sideways and you be that person. You sort of become that person, and then you can access what they access.
Yes.
Is that anywhere close?
It's a little bit like that, but what you're describing is actually the sessions that I do, where the person, the space between the two individuals it's made non-existent, as it were, and then the person and I would become one, or would actually, if you look at it in another way, the person is raised to a level of oneness where they can have access to all this information and tools, right? And I would have access to them in that moment as well.
Okay. So the process, for example, of looking into someone's life and being able to watch it, to see anything that you want to see or that they want you to see, a little bit like watching a movie. You can go to any point on it.
Right.
If it's a movie that you've downloaded and you're looking at it on your computer, you can say, right, I go to this point here.
Yes, it's a little, well, it's not quite like that, because if we look at it on a way of time, the time track, for example, a person's life track, whether in this lifetime or whether their entire life track, backwards and forwards. Forwards is really is a little bit more difficult to see, because we have so many timelines branching off at any one moment, that one thing that the person thinks or says or decides will change that timeline, right? So to look forward in that person's timeline is the most probable timeline if nothing changes, right? But looking backwards is quite easy, because they're here through having having traveled through this particular timeline, one specific one. They can actually go sideways and look at their own parallel timelines, things they would have done if they had done things differently. And also look and see, if they want to do something differently, have a look at a timeline where they did that differently, and see, get all that information and then do it here, recreate it. But looking at somebody's timeline is slightly different to what I've seen other people do. When I've seen psychics look at timelines, they look, like you said, they look like a movie. They go into what's called the Akashic Records and look at it like a movie, while when I do it, I actually go there. I actually go to that point in time and look at that moment like a bilocation. So I'm actually there.
A bilocation in time as well? In
time-space, yeah. In time-space. So I would actually be there, and it's really, I have to be extremely careful when I do that, because if the person is really psychic, they will see me and they will say, "You were there!" And that happened to me recently.
Yes.
The second that I looked at the person, she turned around to me and says, "You were there."
Yes.
You know? And of course I hadn't been before I did it, but she picked it up that I was there at that moment.
Yes.
So I have to be really careful, because it can change things. It can change the past, it can change the future.
So you have to be careful only to be an observer and to leave absolutely no footprints.
No
or
footprints,
nothing.
yeah.
And now, Whitley Strieber, in his work, his website, unknowncountry.com, he was one person among a number of commentators who described very graphically one night a few years ago. He had this extraordinary vivid dream, and dream in inverted commas, and in this vivid dream he experienced himself one after the other in different realities. There was one when his wife, I can't actually remember the details, there's one when either his wife was sick or had died, there was another when they were living in poverty, another one when they were living in a different place and he was doing something different. And it's like he went on this kind of guided tour in this vivid dream, all these different lifetimes. I think there were 6 of them, something like that. And then he returned, and he was so shocked, and he was so struck by this experience that then he wrote it up. And what he explained, like his own explanation for himself and for his readers, was that the way to think of a person going forward through time is not as like a train going along a track, like one point going forwards, but more like a wave front breaking on a big wide beach, and that at different parts of this beach you've got these different timelines, these different experiences that are kind of that are manifesting themselves. And what you're saying then is not only you're affirming this is a fully fledged reality, but you can, when you're working with somebody, you can look sideways and you can see what's there.
Yes, yes. And I mean, even science now is accepting the quantum reality, right? The quantum physics talks about multiple realities, and that's something that, for me, it's real. I can tap into it in my own life and see different things that I want to find out about, right? I can go to different ones where that happened already and get some advice from that other Inelia, how she handled X, or how does she do this or that. And it could be really practical things like playing the violin, making a meal, playing in the stock market, you know. It was really funny because when I went to the Inelia that's really good at the stock market game, after a short conversation she said, "Don't do it. You're useless, just don't do it." And she was right, you know. I did try to do it and it was a total disaster. I shouldn't have.
So you had one version of yourself giving advice to the other version of yourself, which is the you that we're talking to right now.
Right, exactly. And anybody can do this. Anybody can do this. You can think, okay, so I want a reality where I am doing my dharmic work 100%. And again, you have to be really specific because your dharmic work would probably be different in each one of the timelines. If not completely different, then maybe a little different, right? So for example, if you're an artist, you could say, how do I use my art to help people evolve or awaken, something like that. So, okay, so I'm going to tap into the live stream where I have done this, where my art awakens people, and I'm going to really successfully, and I can make a living out of it. Not just a living, but I can make a fabulous income that I can then reinvest and reuse to do even more things in the world. So you can go into that timeline and have a really long conversation with this other person that is you, that's already achieved it, and come back with all that information and just do it on this one.
And so what you're saying here is you've got a whole load of parallel Inelias living alternative sliding doors type lives. This is a reference to Sliding Doors, the movie. Mm-hmm. Except they're not two timelines, they're many.
Infinite.
Infinite. Okay. Infinite. But the one thing that is in common with the Inelia in all of those different parallel lives is that you are here to do a job, and it doesn't really matter whether you're playing the violin, cooking a meal, or doing art. Those are those are the bells and whistles and the wrapping on that life, right?
Right.
So what are you here to do? Because so far we've talked about some of the peripheral aspects of this that are curious and interesting and fascinating to many people. But what are you really here to do?
I only have one job, and that's to raise the vibrational level of the planet, including the human collective, which is part of the planet, to a critical point that will allow a transition into the new paradigm, a new level of awareness for everything, for the planet and every being in it, every rock, every insect, every person. And that's my only job, and I will do anything and will basically, I will do anything to achieve that. If it means helping somebody who's already awakened and aware and enlightened to reach an even higher level of vibration, then I will do that. And if it means waking somebody who was previously asleep and that will raise their level of vibration, I will do that. If it means going to a geographical area and cleansing it so that the vibration can come through properly, I will do that. I don't have one attachment, or the only thing that I'm here to do is raise the overall level of vibration, and that's it.
Now, I've got a million questions to ask you about that, but first let me ask you, how old were you when you first knew that that was what you were here to do?
I always knew it, but I didn't know how to put it into words, because growing up it wasn't something that the family would talk about. My parents were very rational. They were mathematicians and physicists. They were professors. They weren't into spirituality. They weren't into the vibration of the planet or anything like that. So as a child, I didn't have a concept of how to translate what I was here to do. However, I used to do it. If I saw somebody sick, I would sit next to them so that their level of vibration would be would rise, and I would do that naturally throughout my entire childhood and through my teenage years and later on.
So you just kind of move into situation and you'd heal people and you'd help people and you'd nudge situations along.
Right. Basically, yes.
And then, if I understand it right, a little later on, you would do work that could be regarded as being more major, more fundamental, more far-reaching. Is that right?
Yes. I was always working in the background. I was told very early on that I had to kind of wear a mask, and I mustn't show what I was or who I was for many, many years. And that mask, I was asked to remove it in 2002 or 3 or something. And before that, I was working very much on a one-to-one basis with people and doing psychic activism on very quietly, not telling anybody about it.
Okay. And that begs a question. You're saying that you were told to do this or that.
Right.
Who were you told by? How were you told?
This is, I suppose that's a very interesting question. The information comes through very clearly, normally accompanied by synchronistic events that if I miss it, I will be told over and over again. Like a book would fall off the shelf, and a child would say the same sentence at the same time. That was the title of the book. A radio would be blaring and there would be a song that was talking about the same thing. So I was actually told things very clearly, but a lot of the time with regards, that would be more like practical things. Say, go to the park and sit on the bench, there'll be a girl sitting down next to you having her lunch and she needs you to sit next to her, you know. I would get that information and I would do it, and sure enough the girl would turn up, like she would be the visual that I had received, and just sit there eating her lunch and then go away, and that's all that was needed.
And you would, and maybe, I mean, just using that example of the girl on the bench as an example, you wouldn't know why, and you might not ever know why.
Right. And I never needed to know why.
It was just an assignment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were always totally certain at a level of knowing that when you are given one of these assignments, the right thing to do is just not question it,
right,
not attach anything to it, and just do it. Is that right?
Yes. There was a time when I was a teenager. Every teenager rebels, right? And parts of my life had to be about learning to be a human. So I had to go through that rebellious time, and I rebelled against all this too. It's like I would be told, you have to walk very quietly and very gently and not make any waves in the astral. So I would go in blaring, and singing and dancing and jumping on everything. It's like I'm making a lot of noise in the astral.
In the astral.
Yes. Stuff like that, like
right.
A teenager, right?
Okay.
And there were a few points where I was asked to do certain things, and I said no, I don't want to, I don't feel like it, I'm watching TV or whatever, I'm listening to music, or the typical, when your mum clean the room, yeah, whatever. And I went through that at this level, which is kind of a little bit comical if you think about it, because here's this being who's supposed to do this big job and is going through the teenage rebellious stage, and but I learned very quickly that I shouldn't do that because things went terribly wrong when I did, say no. And it was really it's a little bit comical, I suppose, once I said something wicked to my mother, and I knew I mustn't say it, and I can't remember what it was, and my hand just came up and slapped me across the face, and I went, oh, that hurt. And it wasn't really nasty, it was just a little a little something that you feel inside, I shouldn't have done that, you know?